Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the second episode of EyeSee's webinar series on consumer behavior in a global health crisis. Our runtime today is around 20 minutes, and if you have any questions for us during the webinar, you can use the chat box on the right side, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. My name is Sanya, and today I will be talking to two guests. Bojana Berisavljevic, a business development manager, who was with us last week to discuss a tracker study done in the US, France, and Germany, and Stefan Kostic, who is one of EyeSee's advertising insights managers. Hello and welcome.
Hello, Sanya. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
So, it's already been a week since our previous meeting, and many things happened in the meantime. In the US, as expected, the situation has evolved further, and now the biggest share of confirmed infected people is in the US. Globally, we have crossed 1 million infections, and some countries are rapidly approaching the peak of the cycle, while others grapple with it and appear to be moving towards a slowdown. As some of you may know, if you were here with us last week as well, EyeSee launched a tracker study to explore different facets of consumer behavior during a global health crisis. So let's do just a quick recap here. We targeted the general population of the United States, France, and Germany, and used survey and reaction time measurement to get both explicit and implicit insights about their shopping habits, overall sentiment, and media consumption. We spoke about how we used RTM to assess the optimism index in the three countries, and we learned that uncertainty is the prevailing sentiment among consumers right now. Essentially, anything that we saw as emerging trends in the early adoption stage is now being fast-forwarded into the present, and we're making jumps towards more digital solutions and habits. We also found out what are the essential features of online shopping for users who started doing it more frequently, and also how differently the three samples predict to decrease their discretionary spending. Additionally, we discussed two approaches you can use to make your research more robust in a turbulent environment: sentiment-based sample splits and repeating studies after a while to prove your working assumptions as the situation develops. Of course, even though it might sound scary to test products, concepts, or content during an unprecedented historical event, the opportunity costs of not doing so and waiting for the storm to pass might be even bigger. So if you missed last week's session, you can still access it on YouTube or on our website, and I will leave the links in the chat box for everyone after we're done with the session today. Today's webinar will have two thought-provoking segments. One presenting the results of an advertising replication study, and the other focused on the shopper, namely virtual shopping. Before we start, I'd like to announce our next webinar in cooperation with Quirks, a champion of media in the market research industry. The webinar, which is titled Moving Behavioral Research Online, the Next 6 Months, will take place on Monday, April 20th at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time or 4:30 p.m. Central European Time. It will be hosted by Mr. Jonathan Asher, Executive Vice President at EyeSee. Since the webinar will be on a different platform, make sure you're subscribed to it, as you're not automatically subscribed to it right now. So that's it for the technical details, and let's jump straight in. Starting off with advertising, and specifically social media ads. Stefan, just how stable are the study results after 10 months? Could you give us a bit of a background on the first wave of the study, as well as the study design in a nutshell?
Yeah, well, first off, the goal of the replication study was to try to understand, like you said, how stable behavioral and explicit indicators are, considering the considerable change of the circumstances and unexpected change of the respondents' reactions to market research. In simple terms, we wanted to check for our clients whether the data provided nowadays is valid and if we can continue testing undisturbed. The short answer, the data is still valid and stable. So basically, we ran a validation test of a cross-industry advertising study by comparing the respondents' answers from 10 months ago to their responses during the crisis, more precisely, 2 weeks ago, week of March 20th. The study design itself was straightforward. We've tested 18 ads in total, 3 ads per industry on 900 respondents. We fully replicated the testing environment from the first wave of the study. By the way, we are also working on a study with modified context, one that will be COVID-19 aware in terms of feed content. So, all in all, we have used eye tracking, facial coding, and survey to test the dynamic ads in the social media environment and take a more in-depth look into KPIs such as visibility, attention, emotional reach, and ad recall, likability, and others. And the first results clearly show us that the data is very stable across all industries.
So that means what? People reacted to the ads in the same ways?
Yes, overall, but what's even more fascinating is that we were able to pinpoint the same winning ads as we did last time. So not only just the winners, but also the runner-up and the third best performing ads as well. The full top 3 ranking of the ads remains unchanged, with some winners even improving their previous results on some KPIs.
Yeah, well, for me, the congruency of the results is quite striking, especially with the ranking. I guess some ads are just more engaging and better optimized for social media. But still, it's interesting to see they remain so even after a while. But you said some results improved. Which results improved, and why do you think it is so?
Well, except for ad recall, when it comes to the different variables in their behavior in the repeated study, most of them, such as attention, dominant emotion, and emotional reach, stay comparable with the first study. However, for ad recall, we saw an uplift from last year's study, which is quite interesting. And the data has improved both individually and on the industry level. By and large, ads from all industries recorded a better recall, with an average recall uplift per ad at around 8.5 percentage points, from 25.6 to 35%. As for why it has changed, we still don't have any definitive answer, but we have some hypotheses that we are working on validating right now with follow-up testing. We presume this is because respondents are in a more alert state than usual, so they notice stuff around them even more, or that they are spending more time on social media during social distancing. Either way, the stability of the results, even during these turbulent times, is what proves we can rely on the behavioral to judge whether our marketing materials are engaging enough and able to break through the social media clutter. Additionally, overall emotional reach and primary emotions remain stable on both the industry and brand levels.
So if the results are stable, that basically means we can rely on the best practices that we extracted from the first wave of the study, but with even greater confidence, correct?
Yes, that is correct. What we learned from the original studies was that there are some rules for attracting and holding attention when it comes to social media ads. For example, you first need to focus on breaking through in a busy environment and then on retaining that attention. So the first couple of seconds, to be precise, the first 3 seconds of your content is the moment where the person scrolling needs to notice it. That means paying attention to your thumbnail and the first moment of your video or GIF. They need to be super engaging. Light and colors in their thumbnail or the opening scene will draw attention to your ad, and emotional reach was higher for ads that used more intense colors, light or dark, than those that use colors with medium intensity. We also found that showing people or showing your product, if you have one, in the thumbnail is likely to elevate the emotional reach. When it comes to the lowest performing ads, they are all too long for social media. So always make sure to adjust the content length for the channel you're using.
Thanks, Stefan. It's always good to take a look back on these recommendations, especially knowing they still seem to work with the top performing ads. So we see that advertising testing in the US looks mostly stable, but what's happening on the shelves? Let's move on to shopping, both virtual and real life stats. So, Bojana, after last week's focus on what the future of shopping and online shopping behavior will look like, today you have some fresh updates from the study, particularly for the US sample. As the first wave of our tracker study was done at a moment in which the US wasn't as severely affected by the pandemic as our European part of the sample. Could you tell us what's the situation like right now and what has changed the most?
Hi, Sonia. Yes, well, thanks again for having me. So the situation has changed on the ground. And we see that reflected in the survey results as well. So here are a few updates on the American sample from the new wave of the study that happened 2 weeks after the first one. So we see that the fear of coronavirus has increased. We observed an increase in the share of very worried respondents, 42% versus 62%. And that coupled with growing health concerns, we also saw fears of recession and unemployment, so 63% versus 73%. And the cost of healthcare remained high at 78% of people worried about it. What this means is that consumers are increasingly planning to change almost all of their shopping activities. Unlike 2 weeks prior, when most Americans planned to increase food and beverages, household essentials, and over-the-counter drug purchases, now we see them predicting to decrease overall spending even in these categories. And this is similar to what we saw in European markets that were hit by this earlier. So for instance, clothes buying and subscription services are looking into a considerable decrease and even termination. And this is probably people referring to their gym memberships and not digital subscriptions. Another critical finding is the change in online shopping. We are now looking at a significant increase compared to just 2 weeks ago, 45% versus the previous 22%. And aside from free delivery and low prices, enough supplies in stock has also climbed up the priority feature ladder since last time.
Sure, and that makes sense too. If more and more people are switching to online shopping, I guess it's normal to wonder if the retailers will be able to keep up with the demand with their stock. And also, it is interesting to see such a big increase in online shopping in such a short time. Aside from continuing to monitor behavior and attitudes through survey, you added another method to the study this time around, virtual shopping. For those of you who haven't had experience with virtual shopping tests, they simulate real store environments and provide a highly realistic shopping experience to the respondents. Additionally, virtual shopping boasts a 0.8 correlation with in-store purchase behavior. So, are there any interesting findings from that section of the study, and is virtual shopping a reliable testing method right now?
Yeah, so when it comes to virtual shopping results, we see that it is able to pick up the trends happening in actual stores. And we see that the best performing products on the shelves a few months ago are still holding their positions. So that means that the results are reliable and can be used to test certain online shopping behaviors and forecast trends without relying on precise numbers for assessing the situation in the field. So for that, it is better to rely on in-store data that has the most up-to-date information. And another reason why it is essential to use virtual shopping is that many companies have issues with their supply chain. So the current cash register data might be skewed because of that and not because of preferences. So we tested 2 categories with different usage and frequency of purchase, that is beer and toothpaste. Overall, these 2 categories in total see some movement towards a decreasing share of shoppers and brands bought. Changes to the share of shoppers per brand are between 0 and 5 percentage points, and toothpaste category between 0 and 9 percentage points in beer. For the toothpaste shelf, the 2 market leads kept their positions on the brand level, and the mutual comparison remained the same, while the 3rd largest competitor follows. All other brands have significantly lower shares and haven't changed much. Basically, there are no disturbances that would indicate the unreliability of the method. Now, in the beer category, the 2 market leads decreased in consideration and penetration, but still kept their leading positions, while the challengers in the category changed very little. All other brands held their relative positions in share. And another interesting thing to point out is that hotels, restaurants, and cafes is basically off the radar right now. Many consumers have switched to at-home consumption, and hence the increase in store sales of many products in this category. I would say that this means we can still use virtual shopping for evaluating relevant performance indicators. For example, we'd say that packaging, point of sales materials, and planogram studies are entirely safe if you have to pick a winning design. New product development and concept testing can also be done, for sure, but still for these, we strongly suggest using the 2 approaches we discussed last week to safeguard your results. To recap, that was sentiment-based splits and reconfirming findings after a while.
Yeah, some types of studies tap into attitudes that are not as affected by the crisis as others. And it goes for both advertising and shopper studies. Brands still need their package designs or POS materials, or ads for that matter, to be able to attract attention, regardless of the circumstances. Now, as we're slowly coming to a close of today's session, I'd like to ask both of you to recap the key findings from both studies, and if you could share a thing our listeners today should take with them. Boana, could you go first?
So for sure. So when it comes to the Tracker study, we see that the US samples has expressed an even greater intention to keep their spending in check. Also, as much as 45% of the respondents have changed their online habits. Even more of them predict that they will change in the upcoming period as well, with most of them buying online much more frequently. And we see a higher level of worry among respondents as well. And this gap between the US and the European behavior is closing. Regarding virtual shopping, all our findings remain stable and players in the market retain their relative positions. Furthermore, we do see a slight dip in consideration and penetration in both the beer and toothpaste categories, which is in line with the survey responses and planned decrease in spending. However, brand ranking remains unaffected by this, so you can still use virtual shopping in these circumstances.
Great. Thanks, Boana. And with the feeling of uncertainty still looming, more and more people switch to online shopping, and virtual shopping still offers reliable insights. So moving to Stefan, I think there's some similar conclusions when it comes to advertising too, right? What should advertisers do in a moment like this?
So, although it may be scary for advertisers to decide whether they should keep on advertising their products during the coming months, our study showed that people are still open to communication from brands. So this might be the right time to build brand equity, work on brand perception, and stay responsive to the needs of your customers. Whether you pre-test ads now or later, you will get the same winning ads as we have seen earlier. All study findings and trends remain stable after 10 months, so we can rely on the results as we continue to test ads during this time. Can we still use norms or not? The first conclusion is that for most KPIs, the results are the same. For ads, we can expect higher ad recall, so we need to modify this. For other types of testing, we expect the same conclusions. However, a note of caution, this is the situation right now, and we will keep track of it as time passes. Social media users scored higher on ad recall during the crisis, as we have seen. Ads became equally and quite highly visible, regardless of the industry. And additionally, the retention rates of the advertised brands are significantly higher.
Thanks, Stefan. So it seems that regardless of the situation and the slight differences in perception, social media ads are still a potent tool for brands, but only if done right. So if the contextual differences don't affect our findings in a state of crisis, there's still a huge space to improve and adjust the content and format of their ads by pre-testing them. Thank you both for your time, and thanks to everyone who showed up today. As always, we're open to taking in questions you'd like answered in some of our upcoming sessions or discussing any of these results, so don't hesitate to reach out with those. If you have any questions regarding our solutions or methods, send them over through email or social media. Our team is here to help you to find the best way to navigate this changing situation. Once again, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to the Big Quirks webinar on moving behavioral research online in the coming months, which will air on Monday, April 20th at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time and 4:30 p.m. Central European Time on a different platform. The registration link is in the lower right corner of your screens. I will also share the link to last week's episode of the webinar in the chat box in case you missed it and you would like to share it with someone else or take a deep dive into specific results from the US, France, and Germany. Thanks again. We are really glad we can share insights and best practices during this time as well and keep learning from each other. It was a pleasure hosting this and see you on April 20th. Goodbye and stay safe.